Hello everyone, welcome to the Complete Python Beginner course. In this video, I'll be taking a complete beginner to programming, that is no previous programming experience, through everything you need to know about programming and Python as a beginner. When you start programming, you're likely to forget things. It's part of the process. To make things easier for you all, I'm going to be including a cheat sheet and a written version of this tutorial at the end of the video to help you quickly recall everything you learned today, as well as go back to any concept that you may have forgotten. I will also let you know the 7 problems that made me fall in love with programming and made it finally click for me after several failed attempts. With that, let's get started. We'll begin with a very quick brief on Python. Um, the language was released in 1991 and it was created by a guy named Guido van Rossum. It's used for a whole host of things, including machine learning and AI. This is actually one of the more prominent areas Python is being used today. It's also quite heavily used for data analysis and web scraping, as well as web development. It's very good for automation and scripting. I use Python quite a bit to automate my work or make it easier. Python is not usually the first choice for game development, but it's something you can do if you wanted to. And you can use it to build software. This is not an exhaustive list. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with Python, but this is some of the more common areas where it's used. Python is designed for readability, which is one of the things I love about the language. Because of this, it's very easy to get started with. Um, from my personal experience, I find it really quick and easy to get up to speed with Python code that I haven't seen before. And finally, it's an interpreted language, which makes it quick for prototyping. Um, Now, there are two main types of languages, compiled and interpreted. Types of languages can mean a whole number of things, but in this case, I mean how the computer runs your program. So, compiled languages are converted into machine code and stored on your computer as executables, the .exe files that you may have seen. When you run the executable file, that machine code is executed by your CPU. Interpreted languages are a little different. When you execute an interpreted language, a program called an interpreter reads your code line by line and executes it. So if this were Python code, the interpreter would read the first line, convert it into machine code, and then execute it. Then it would read the second line, convert into machine code, execute. Read the third line, convert into machine code, execute. Um, this makes it slower than compiled languages because compiled languages have the whole program already converted into machine code. Um, they are ready to run, but interpreted languages need to be read, understood, and executed. So that makes them slower than compiled languages. And because of this, you'll also often hear that Python is slow. However, as a beginner, do not worry about this. There's a reason Python is one of the most used languages in the world, in addition to being used by massive companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Netflix, Intel, etc. And it's also the choice for data analysts and data science, including AI. So don't worry about the language being slow. It's not as big a deal as it's sometimes made to be. As a beginner, it is imperative that your focus is on building things in place of worrying about the fastest or best language. So don't worry about which language is the best or the fastest. Just learn the language and build stuff. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get our system set up to write some code. We need two pieces of software to write and run our Python code: a text editor where we write our code, and the Python interpreter which will run our code. Um, Some modern systems come with the Python interpreter already installed, so we'll first check to see if it's already installed on our system. What I'm going to do is open up command prompt. On Linux or Mac, you can use the terminal. You can also use the Windows terminal if you have that installed, but for simplicity, I'll just use command prompt. So I'll open up start and type in cmd. That brings up command prompt. I'll run it. Now, what we want to do here is type in Python space dash dash version. So that's Python space two dashes version and press enter. If you see something like this, Python 3.12.2, that means Python is installed on your system. If, however, it's something like command not found or Python is not installed, then Python is not installed on your system, and you'll have to go get it. Some also ensure that you have 3.9 or higher. If you don't, you may wanna update. But yeah, to get Python, I'm going to go to Google and type in Python. We want the link that goes to python.org. So for me, that's this first one here. I'll click that. I'll go over to downloads. Since I'm on Windows, I'll come down to Windows and I'll click this button to download Python. When you click this button, it should start the download for you. Okay, there we go. Run the installer and you should be greeted with this screen. So here I'm going to check this box that says edit Python to path. This is important, and I'm going to choose customize installation. I'm going to leave everything as it is. Next. Now here you have a choice. The first option here says install Python for all users. If you have more than one user on your system and you want to install Python for them as well, you can check this box. If you just have one user account or you don't want to install Python for all users, then you can leave this unchecked. You can also change the location, the install location down here, and once you're ready, you can click install. Give it a second to install. Now once it's done installing, it should say setup was successful, and we can close out of this window. Let's verify our Python installation. So I'm going to close out this old command prompt window. This is important, and I'm going to open up a new window. So start cmd, and once again Python dash dash version, and you should see Python 3.12.2 or something similar. With that, Python is installed. Now let's get our text editor. For these sets of tutorials, I'm going to be using VS Code. It's one of the most popular options out there and it's pretty good. So I would recommend VS Code. To get VS Code, once again in Google, I'm going to type in VS Code. So VS space code. That should bring up this Visual Studio Code link. So I'm going to click that. And you can download it here. So VS Code is also available for Mac and Linux, so you should be good there. I'm gonna download the Windows version since I'm on Windows. Okay, and that should start the download for me. Once downloaded, run the installer and you should be greeted by a screen like this. So I'm gonna click on accept the agreement. You can go through the license terms. Next. Now create a desktop icon, that's up to you. For me, I'm going to check all these boxes. You can choose not to, that's up to you, but I personally like to have this. Basically what these allow me to do is if I right click a folder or a file, I'll have this option to open with code. And I work with VS Code a lot, so it's pretty handy to have that. That's for the first two options. Third one, you can leave that checked. Add to path, you can also leave that checked, that's also fine. First two is up to you. Just right click if you want that there, then it's pretty handy to have. So you can click next and install. I'm gonna cancel out of this because I already have it installed, but click install and that should install it on your system. Once done, you should have an icon on your desktop, or you can also find it in your start menu. So when you open VS Code, you should be greeted by a screen like this or something similar, and we have VS Code installed and working. Awesome.